Welcome to week 5, class 2. And today we'll talk about managing resistance to change. So change programs can affect a lot for people in the organization, and that can be a lot to take. They affect culture, and that refers to the normal ways of thinking, feeling, and behavior. Right? They affect who you work with, and they affect what you do. So you could see why people might resist a change program, because potentially it could be a lot of disruption for them. At the organizational level, change programs affect the structural subsystem through changes to, say, written policies and operating procedures. And then it could change the organizational structure. That's a structural subsystem. So who reports to whom? It could be restructuring. Could affect the technical subsystem by changing what's produced with what. Resistance to change is normal, and it cannot be effectively avoided or suppressed. So as you may recall from the last lecture, conflict is a normal process in team development. It's a normal part of the team development process. And so similarly, resistance to conflict and conflict are a normal part of organizational development. And so as an OD practitioner, you can't act like a Dalek. You can suppress resistance in the short term, but that's just a bad long-term strategy because you need to get people on board. Resisting is something that people do, and so you'll need to use your people skills and your political acumen. Fortunately, resistance is at least partly predictable. So there's some known patterns, which helps you be aware of what to expect. In the very first phase of change, and this may have happened in the organization before you were hired, because in order to hire you, the desire for change has to be there already. So in that first phase, there's a few people who perceive the need for change, and other people would not be into this because they're happy with the status quo and they don't think anything's wrong. And so the resistance is pretty massive at that point, and most people might perceive the change agent to be some kind of wingnut. And do you understand the etymology of this? Like, why is somebody with extreme views called a wingnut? I'm not somebody with realistic interests. I don't understand tools and things like that, but isn't the point of this? It makes it easy to screw something on, right?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Then why is a wingnut somebody with extreme views?
They're an agent for change.
They are. There's a lot of leverage.
Yeah, that's where I was going with this.
In phase 2, the change is more widely understood and it's discussed in the organization. So people have heard about this idea that maybe we should allow women into the workplace. And you'll be able to clearly identify different groups of people, right? Kind of like different political parties within the organization, different factions of people who are for or against the change. And those factions have different values, and they're in a place of values conflict. So at this point, the idea itself isn't novel and shocking anymore. It's something that we're talking about. At some point, there would be a showdown. So those can range from pretty subtle to quite overt, but at some point, decisions will be made and people will show up and advocate for what they want or fight against what they don't want. Now, let's say the change agents win. Then in phase 4, there will be remaining resistance, and the resistors might try to mobilize to do something about it. And maybe you'll go back to stage 3 again, have another stage 4. And if the change agents lose, then I might try to put up another fight. And some people might think that they're stubborn, or they need to let go, or they need to get on board. In the final phase, the change has settled in and it's become the new status quo. So now the people who think that you should be allowed to smoke at your desk or ban menstruating women from the workplace are the crazy ones. But at one time, those were normal attitudes, views, and values. Change needs people who advocate for it. So change programs benefit from advocates who have high power or high status in the organization, and status in the sense of real respect. So if there's somebody that is advocating for a change and they're powerful, they can do something, or you really respect them, you might be more interested in what they have to say. And they need to walk the chalk. Okay, they need to model it. They need to be the change they want to see. So you wouldn't want people to be noticing hypocrisy. The reason we need to build renewal processes into organizations is because a large amount of sudden change that is to take place in a short time is overwhelming and unpleasant. You can avoid that by building renewal processes into the organization. And when I say build into the organization, what does that mean? It means there's a position in the organization that kind of starts these programs, run these programs. There are processes. We do consultations. Some organizational cultures are more prepared for and open to change and receptive to change because adaptability is part of the culture itself. Those are the community and entrepreneurial cultures. The bureaucracy that's probably hiring you because it's the one that needs to change the most is also the one that's probably the most change resistant, okay? Because its culture favors stability and is overly concerned with internal politics versus the external world and getting results. See where the bureaucratic organization falls there? It's an organization that has evolved to solve a stable problem. Maybe now things aren't so stable in the external world anymore. That's kind of what it's developed around, what it wants, and it tends to have an internal focus. So it's more about the employees than the customers. Okay, so you get a lot of politics. But that is the kind of organization you're probably going to be working with as an OD consultant. So competitive cultures are more interested in being attuned to the external world because they care about the results. But the bureaucracy is kind of the most change-resistant beast. It is important to evaluate a change program regularly, to collect data and listen to feedback continually and continuously, because that's what will allow you to course correct instead of crash and burn. I'm not sure what to make of this figure. So they put all the factors into little boxes and then made the boxes point at a circle with arrows. So I don't know if that helps your understanding. But research in psychology does suggest that if you make up this kind of figure, like when you're studying, right, if you drew that, then that can help you remember information for a test because it commits it to memory in a different way. Just like if you're studying for a test, if you run there's a diagram and you run your fingers over it, that kind of brings in a different kind of sensory. It puts it in your mind in a different way because it uses a different encoding process. And if you have 6 different routes to a memory, then maybe one of them will work on the test. And you won't be left with that tip of the tongue phenomenon when you're like, I can't remember. So you can also increase your chance of remembering something by reading out loud with your voice what you're reading in your book, because then your brain's remembering what you're reading through your eyes. And it's also remembering your own voice reading it, and then tracing things with your finger and coming up with these dumb little figures.
Committing the imprint to more parts of your
yes,
brain. Probably.
That is what I meant. Yeah. I don't know if it helps.
I don't know if that's true, but that's my theory on it.
Yes.
Sounds like.
The book has this position that, you should use visuals, and then sometimes they come up with these visuals that make me wonder. This figure works some asymmetry into the graph to indicate that high resistance involves more resistance than low resistance, in case you missed that part. The high resistance has more area, and more area means more resistance. So your change program is most likely to be successful when the change that you're trying to achieve is small, right? So smaller tasks more likely to get done, and when it's in tune with the organizational culture. You can expect the highest level of resistance when you're trying to implement a major change that runs against the grain of the culture. In a bureaucracy, many OD programs will be running against the culture in some way. And so that's why it's good to try to build renewal somehow into the organization, so you can always do a little bit of that without scaring people in the organization too much, so that your entire organization doesn't get so maladapted to the environment that it can't function anymore. kind of like, imagine the bureaucracy is like a big ship that's hard to turn around. So it doesn't like sudden changes, don't tend to go down so well. It's not a nimble organizational structure. Chapter 5 introduced the idea that while there are forces that drive change, there are also forces that resist it. And if those forces were equal in strength, the aggregate of all the forces that are driving for the change were of the same strength as the aggregate of all the forces that were against it, then nothing would happen. So what you want to do to create the change, and imagine the change is on some metric. So in this case, there's an absenteeism rate, and they want to decrease it. So the present rate is 6%, I don't know, 6%, and they want to move it down to about 4%. So in order to do that, they would need to mitigate the resisting forces, so things that tend to make absenteeism worse. So what are they saying? Inclement weather and climate. I don't know what an organization can do about that. Allow people to work remotely. Then that might decrease your absenteeism rate. Below standard vacation time. Okay, so that suggests that if you are not giving people enough vacation time, they will get sick more often. And that would increase your absenteeism rate. So if you gave them more vacation time, you might see less absenteeism. I'm not sure, would that work to the benefit of the organization? Do they care if it's a vacation day or a sick day? Oh, you can predict the vacation days, but not sick days, because your employee that wants a vacation is just get whenever they want it.
Well, it just facilitates trust because it allows them to just be honest about what they're doing.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so if you want the absenteeism rate to go down, you need to mitigate those resisting forces. And then there's things that you could also do to push it down, like making people afraid of losing their job, or trying to increase their commitment to their team, making their work more interesting. So maybe if you could push those things up, that would also push the rate down. Or maybe rewards, give them more rewards for team performance, then maybe they'll show up. That's kind of the idea. However, you need to remember that putting too much pressure on people can cause them to just break down and act unpredictably. So if you really put the fear of God in them, they might lose their job. I don't know, maybe they'll just go quit and find another, or. So gentle touches can be more effective. So what are the driving forces for change? People may be dissatisfied with the present situation. Maybe the organization isn't getting the results it needs. Maybe sales are too low. There are external pressures towards change. So customers might want something different. Market conditions are changing. Maybe there's new technology out there and you have to adapt to that. Legal requirements are another thing. I'm interviewing for an OD job tomorrow that's about accessibility. So universities are having these OD positions around accessibility coming up, and that's happening because of the Accessibility Act. So there was legislation that said, you need to make post-secondary post-secondary institutions accessible by, I don't know, was it 2024? I can't quite recall, but now universities are hiring those people because of a law was enacted, so the Accessibility Act. And I imagine that a lot of the EDI stuff we have represents compliance with, say, the Human Rights Act. But then let's say you have students, and a lot of students are, say, female and 18 years old. They might have very liberal political views. And to make the university more attractive to them, you might have to demonstrate values that would appeal to them. Once a change program gets started, people can get invested. So you've hired somebody, it's cost a few $1,000s. Well, now you want that to work. So people can become committed after they've gotten engaged and spent their time and money on it. And then motivation by management really matters. So if management seems to want this, is talking about this, is doing things, is modeling the change, then that inspires people to want it too. People resist changes for many good reasons. They might not understand what's going on. Managers often just don't tell employees what's going on. They communicate a decision in a certain very safe way after it's already been made. So there may be rumors swirling around, and that's why it helps or can be helpful to explain what's going on, even very openly and explicitly. The textbook mentions something called open book management. And that would be a very high level of openness and transparency where we say, this is the problem I'm trying to solve. And, what do you think? And let people look at the records. That's a really high level of trust. Change means leaving your comfort zone and the known and established ways of doing things and relating to each other. So that's why gradual change is more effective, because it's disruptive. People may also fear for their own position. They might worry that they'll be out of a job if this new technology or process is introduced. They might be afraid that power in the organization will be redistributed in a way that disfavors them. So people are part of cliques, and let's say that you're part of a powerful group and the change will shift power to someone else. Well, maybe your group might not like that. And your group of people might be more concerned about their own power and prestige than the overall well-being of the organization. And that probably happens a lot. OD efforts that try to equalize power, remember that's one of the values of OD, one of the values of the field, right? If it's trying to equalize power and flatten hierarchies, that's an automatic threat to management's own power. And that's why a lot of OD is performative. It's important to listen to resistance. And I know that I said that I wouldn't teach you ballroom dance because that would violate syllabus policy, but it's actually a really good metaphor for leadership and followership. So the follow, that's the dance word for the person who dances the follower role, uses resistance to communicate that there's something wrong. So if you've ever danced the follow role and you realize that the lead is going to crash, you kind of communicate that through tension. Okay, and so the lead has to be aware of that resistance because it means that something's wrong or the position's uncomfortable or the follow's getting tired. Okay, it means something is wrong, and then they need to make adjustments to the choreography accordingly. Okay, so the resistance is feedback. It is prudent to listen to feedback and also shows respect. So you may be able, if you take the complaints seriously, to address concerns and relieve some doubts. And you might end up incorporating it creatively into a better dance, into a better program. So what are good strategies to promote change? It's raining really hard out there. So favor gradual long-term change when possible. Sometimes there's a crisis out there and organizations need rapid change, but generally all things held constant, it's better to have gradual long-term change that's built into the organizational structure and process. You need a clearly articulated vision. People need to know what you're trying to achieve and what kind of direction you're trying to go. This is especially important when people get into these sort of petty quarrels and he said, she said kind of things, because you don't want to get entangled in that. And you need to be able to pull people out of the weeds and facing the right direction again, which means you need to know and be able to communicate what the direction actually is. So communication is important and needs to be effective, and it should be frequent. Managers have to walk the talk and practice what they preach. So you don't want to see a manager saying that they really want to see, I don't know, more employee engagement and then engaging in decision making that is totally political and does not listen to feedback. Because when people see that, they don't take you seriously anymore. The book says that the climate should be conducive to change. Some cultures, especially bureaucratic cultures, are not compatible with change. So how are you going to change the culture? Can you really do that? How much of that can you do? So right off the bat, you have a bit of an issue there. That said, you don't want to get into cycles where you're threatening and people feel threatened and respond in threatened ways. So maintaining an attitude of respect and trying to be understanding works in your favor. Including stakeholders in the change is respectful. You're more likely to get them on board and design an effective strategy if they are part of it. Otherwise, what are you doing? You're imposing it on them and not including their perspectives, and they might not like that very much, and it might not work. You need to reward people for the change. So somebody might ask, well, why should I do this? Is it enforceable anyway? And if it's not something that you can enforce, then can they just opt out? Can they just ignore you and not do it? So how are you rewarding them for doing whatever it is that you want them to do? So if you want to decrease the absenteeism rate, how are you going to reward people who come in every day? There's another problem called presenteeism, and that's when people like drag themselves into work and don't really do anything. That just pops into my head. But the point is, you need to reward them. And then another way around conflict is negotiation in politics. So maybe if a certain group of people, let's say you're trying to buy over a certain group of people to a change initiative and they don't really want it, well, is there something else that they want that you could give them so that they will accept this change? So there's this kind of idea that maybe if I scratch your back, you'll scratch mine, that kind of thing. And at the end of the day, if the change needs to happen, if management wants the change and people just aren't accepting it, or if their positions aren't compatible with the change, then maybe they are let go. So that's a pattern, that's a power strategy. That is not consistent with the OD values, but it is something that happens. Sorry? Yeah, sometimes it does have to happen. So then, how are people let go? So people can be transferred within the organization. So maybe there is a similar role to theirs in a different department. So you'll see that kind of thing. And sometimes people are terminated, and they can be legitimately or illegitimately dismissed. So if somebody is violating their contract, if their performance is unacceptably poor, then you can let them go. In some contexts and jurisdictions, I think employers can fire at will. I think that's more of a thing in the United States than in Canada. But there are labor laws. And then a few weeks ago, we talked about constructive dismissal. So even if you haven't done anything wrong, but you're being a thorn in their side, they have their ways to help people out of the organization. If somebody's position is not a permanent position, then maybe you just don't renew their contract. Then there are restructurings, and there's honest restructuring and disingenuous restructuring. So sometimes a change does actually require restructuring, and then some positions are eliminated. But something I've also seen is it's more about the person that's in the position. So getting rid of the position is a way to accomplish that. Then sometimes people are kind of bought out. So people can be offered incentives to resign or to take an early retirement. And the way those incentives might work are that the person, it's in a person's interest to say, accept a package, and that package would be valued at about the same amount as what they would get from a tribunal if, say, they were unfairly dismissed. But you wouldn't have to go through all that pain and expense and process. So it's kind of a better deal to take the package. That's the kind of thing you might see. Layoffs can be conducted in ways that are more or less respectful. So here's kind of, I've seen both, and here's what I would say a disrespectful layoff looks like. And so I've worked as a notification consultant, and that's when, say, the person comes into their workplace one day, but they're asked, oh, can you actually going to have a meeting in this little room over here? And then there's somebody from HR to meet with them, and they have a package, and they explain that the person's position no longer exists, and this is the, what's the word for that? The amount of money that you get, severance. And oh, and you'll get your benefits for the next 30 days, blah, blah, blah. And sometimes the things that people are told in those meetings are not, I don't know, they might not be the whole reason, but it will usually be something like, oh, there's been, I don't know, this unit's been outsourced, and now all the jobs are in Brazil, and we looked for a place for you in the organization, but there was nothing that was a match for your skills, and we're very sorry. But an HR manager wouldn't, if the real reason was a little shadier, they wouldn't tell you that because they don't want to get sued. So the reasons that people hear are usually these very safe ones that are totally about external uncontrollable conditions, but it really might be more of a political decision. One thing that sometimes you might see is that the manager, before doing that, needs to feel better about doing it. So they might speak disparagingly of the employee. That, oh yeah, this guy used to pick his nose at this desk and sent some hostile emails, and you know, kind of maybe they ready themselves for that. I can't imagine that that's a fun job. And then some employers will treat the now former employee in a way that almost looks a bit like the way you treat someone that could be a potential criminal. So then the person's not allowed to go back into the workplace to get their things. All their things will be put in a box for them and FedExed to them in about a week. But right now we need you to hand over your access card and your phone and your company credit card, and somebody will escort you off the premises. But you're not going back in to say goodbye. And all your logins don't work. And if you had any personal information on the company computers, sorry, that's all been deleted now. And you were told that you weren't supposed to put personal information on the company computer anyway. So that is kind of one way that a layoff can look like. And the person might not have much of a sense of closure. And maybe at the next team meeting, let's say there's a weekly team meeting, that's when the manager will explain to the team that, oh, so-and-so is no longer with us anymore, but you don't sort of get to say bye. Then there are layoffs that happen in ways that are more respectful. So an employer will know before they're going to do that. There'll be some time. And so it's tough on a person if that happens to them and they just signed up for a mortgage. But a company could say something like, you know, due to these conditions, you know, we're having some financial problems, and, you know, there's going to be a 20% labor force reduction, and this will happen over the next 6 months. And it will be on the basis of, say, operational need, or on the basis of performance. If you know that you're not going to be producing a certain kind of widget anymore, maybe that whole widget plant shuts down. Like sometimes certain units are outsourced. Sometimes, you know, they just have to, there were 10 positions and now there can only be 5. And so you pick your people, your 5 highest performers. But you can communicate about that to people. And that's nicer than a sudden shock where you just go into work one day and that happens. Notification meetings should, probably happen in a discrete location, so it can, make other people uncomfortable to see it or to have sort of that be seen. Some companies will hold it in a hotel. So if you've kind of heard that these things are going on, and then you have a meeting to meet a manager at a hotel, that could be what happens. It's respectful to appreciate the person's contributions. Like if they've been working there for 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, they've shown up, they've done some things, they've achieved something. And so it's always good to say thank you. And it's nice to see, so something I was saying is saying that the person, they now know they're being laid off, but their job will continue for, let's say, until the end of the month, and they can kind of close things up, say bye, give the next person the right kind of files, that kind of thing. And then a nice thing that employers can do is provide outplacement support. And these ads are from an HR firm that provides a service called Right Management. But I like the idea there. So you see they have the outplacement candidate, and they're showing them kind of when they're at work. So you can see, well, this guy's been contributing. He was giving these seminars, and this person helped with that project, and she was part of the team. And well, do you want to just cut someone off? Well, no, maybe you can give them wings. And so what an outplacement program does is career development. It's transition management. So then there's support for that person in going through that transition, because that can be hard on a person, and they have someone to talk to about it, and they can assess their skills and think about what other things they want to do, get some resume support, right? Get training for interviews, and it kind of helps them on to the next thing. I have a quick question for you. That's why I parked this slide at the back. So, some students sent me these. What's the university selling?
In which side?
So what is that ad saying?
In a school this size, every resource is attainable. Or I've never felt so secure and ready for a job. It's communicating that SMU is a place that will have resources and make you feel resourced. In other words, safe and provided for.
Okay, so you'll have the resources.
Empowered, really, is probably a
yeah, and they're kind of
resources.
Yeah, they're
accessible. That you have to use. So it's empowered. And then the second ad, I felt so secure and ready for the job. It's the after that hopefully the university is showing that the university has done its job, because that's presumably somebody who's done their degree and has experience using resources and feels empowered to be able to get a job.
So be able to get a job. Yes, so I have a chat saying the promise of a career after school. Can they make good on that promise or implied promise?
I mean, not to the degree that community colleges do. And is that a university's job to get people a job? Is that what university is about?
Academics argue about this kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like with
thinking really is kind of what I
yeah. With community college, is there any level of guarantee that you can get a job? Like, would they give you a refund if, like, you could not get a job with this?
No, but I think they do things like for the first year, they'll provide you with, they'll set you up for interviews. I think like there's certain things like that I don't quote me on that specific thing, but I've heard of people.
Career services here at SMU will do that. So you can, like, if you're interested in interviewing and writing a resume, they'll do all that here.
But
do
also
that for alumni.
Community college programs are usually designed to just do a thing.
Yeah.
Whereas universities do not, I don't think. Like, no matter what
Yeah.
the marketing says, like, that's not really how an academic institution works.
Right. Mark, you don't have to type in the chat. You can speak if you want to speak. Where was I going with this? These could be variables that could be operationalized. So that I feel so secure and ready for a job is something called perceived employability.
It's funny that it doesn't say I have a job. It works. It's feel. Right?
So I am employed. So employability is your propensity to be employed, but then perceived employability is how employable you feel. And there are measures for that. And you probably recognize resources as a component of adaptability. So you have your resources that you use responsibly to respond to get the results you want. Maybe the result is employability. Now, I got a question by email about a rubric for the team assignment. And so I started putting one together because it was an excellent question. And we had been working on one together. Was it a couple of weeks ago now? So I put this in there to show you what I'm thinking. This is a draft rubric. You can see where I'm going with it. So introduction. Let's say I'm a busy manager. I already forgot that I asked you to do this. And when the secretary gives me this report, I look at it for the first time, just remind me what's going on. Diagnosis. So that was covered in the last chapter. So, what are the problems? What's a symptom? What's a problem? We looked at some diagnostic models. Some of them would be more appropriate than others. The intervention is a presentation that's paired with a reading. I have posted the reading to Brightspace, but you can't access it right yet because it isn't visible. That's not completely set up, but it will be available to you very soon. And then you can read that. And I'm interested in, what are the strengths? What are the limitations? What opportunities does it present? Does it involve risks? I was just saying that a student asked me about a rubric, and I'm working on it. We had started sketching it out on the board, and this is kind of what I've got to. So, what's the problem? So the presentation is paired with a reading, and that will be, I'm going to have that visible to you on Brightspace very soon. Actually, one of the career services staff had been scheduled to come in and give that presentation live, and now they're not sure whether they'll be able to do it because they're understaffed. So we might be just watching the video. I'm not sure yet. I'll let you know how that pans out. Yeah, so it is possible that, anyway, they'll let me know, but that should tell you something, right? Like, if you're not sure that you can deliver the intervention because you're understaffed and right, that's information in itself.
How so?
Sorry?
How so?
What does it tell you about their capacity to administer it?
Is it a separate version they were going to be doing here for us, or is it just they were going to be doing it for another group and we're going to witness it?
No, they were going to do it for you guys.
Oh, okay.
And after not sure if we can, I knew that they were understaffed, and I said, I do have a recording of it.
If your retention rates are much lower than comparable universities, you would think that the very thing that seems to be the choke point in the problem should be staffed really well. That they should be focusing on that. Is that what you mean?
It's
there should be resources
information,
in that
right?
part.
Like it's a sign if they're struggling with their workload to the point that because they're taking on an extra thing, right? And maybe they don't have the capacity to deliver it. Like
they already deliver that to other classes.
So the intervention was developed around for the Introduction to Business Management course that is traditionally taught by
They're adding an
Brain.
extra section of it.
And then there's something called the First Year Experience Committee, and there's a bunch of instructors who are on it, including me. And so I believe it's been given in first year chemistry and in my intro psych class. And so the video that I gave you the link to is from my intro psych class, and then they were going to come into this class to do it, and I was going to have you evaluate it. But now maybe they can't come in.
If they don't, can we use the video?
Yes, but what I'm trying to say is, and this fact is also information. Okay. So you have to have the capacity to deliver the intervention. So there's a case analysis every chapter, and I posted a worked example. Those worked examples are, they wouldn't be good enough for something to give a client, but they are an example of a case analysis process. And so you kind of come up with some reasonable suggestions for the next actions. So like, what should the university do next? And they would need to be feasible. You could come up with something that was totally unfeasible, right? So let's say you said, well, you should roll it out and deliver it in every class. Well, can you do that? Can they do that? Do they have the staff for that? Can the instructor say no? See what I mean? I just tried to come up with something absurd there, but please don't make recommendations that would not be feasible. If the organization wanted to go ahead with this, how would they know if it worked? If you wanted to evaluate this, if you wanted to see if this workshop was effective, what might you do? And then you kind of want to end with some clear recommendations. So you might kind of offer some alternatives. You might say, these are 3 or 4 or 5 things you could do, but we think that this is the best direction.
So in terms of the team assignment, we're meant to be working that like the versions that are given.
Those are way too. You would never give a client something like that. So if you went and look at one of those worked examples, like for the Grace and chemical companies,
yeah.
It's not something you could ever give a client, but it does show you how to think through certain aspects of the problem. So I think it's handy to look at one.
Okay.
It's a good tool. And then the presentation would have to be understandable to an intelligent layperson. So if something's choked with academic jargon, that's not what we're looking for from a consultant. You want to have a sort of constructive attitude, even if you think they're being fools. You can say that. Writing should be clear. Managers don't want to read a 200-page dissertation. So, I think 10 pages would be long. I think 1 page or 2 pages is probably too short. But not, 50. The referencing style that's used in the textbook, it might be something like Vancouver format. It uses endnotes, but you have like a little number. So there's like a little subscript number. That's a lot easier to read than APA format. So academics like APA format, you can see everyone's names and they're related to that, who's first author, but nobody else cares. And then I was thinking, kind of floating this idea, I guess, about peer evaluation. But what if I assign you into a group of 3 or group of 4, and one person just totally didn't deliver, and they never showed up. They didn't answer their emails, and they didn't do anything, and you guys wrote an A+ report. Should that person also get that? So what if you gave your peers sort of a score out of 100, and if they show up and they pull their weight and they communicate and they adjust to feedback and they're good team players, just give them 100. But if somebody, a 0 would mean that a person did not contribute. And if you were quite displeased, you might give them a 50. I imagine that would be motivating. I got this idea from.
I've done that in other courses.
Have you?
In my master's program, and that's fair, I think.
That's where I got the idea from the Master's of Public Administration program.
I did it in my MBA.
Oh, okay.
Business equivalent of the MPA, basically.
Okay, I see. All right, I got it from the MPA program, and what usually happened is that people just gave each other hundreds. But you don't want to be in a situation where there's somebody that's just like not pulling their weight, and I know that does sometimes happen. Okay, so quiz 3 is due Sunday at it says 2300. Maybe it should be 2359, the stroke of midnight. But you know the policies around asking for extensions. I will probably be posting the quiz on Friday evening instead of Thursday evening because I have a geometry review to prepare for. And there will be a practice quiz again. So thank you for listening, and I will stop the recording.